wonderful VCs with us. So we've got Lana Caron, who is actually a partner at Solas BioVentures. She is a seasoned healthcare tech executive and investor with deep expertise spanning venture capital, corporate development, and startup leadership. She is based in Boston, but currently, as I mentioned, a partner with Solas, which is based in Chattanooga here in Tennessee. And they are a life science venture capital firm that invests in innovative companies across biopharmaceuticals, medical devices, diagnostics, and digital health. Lana has previously served on leadership teams across a variety of health tech startups, leading business development, marketing, and sales. I met Lana up in Boston this summer at Bio, and she has a wealth of knowledge and expertise and is a wonderful person to chat with. We also have Chris Garabedian, who's the founder and CEO of Xontogeny, and the chairman at that. Xontogeny is a life science accelerator which launched in 2016 to advance promising technologies from early development through commercialization. He also serves as portfolio manager of the Perceptive Xontogeny Ventures funds, leading investments in early stage biotech, medtech, and health tech companies. He's a veteran biopharma exec, and Chris was previously president and CEO of Sarepta Therapeutics and serves on the board of many life science companies. Chris and I also met in Boston very shortly before he moved down here to Tennessee, actually. So it was fun to see you at some of the local events after that. So we're doing this a little bit differently today, and you'll have to bear with us for the camera views. We'll have Chris jump on screen here in just a moment. But we're going to do a little bit of a fireside chat style. So we'll have some questions and hear from Lana and Chris, and then we'll have opportunity for questions from the audience as well. So if you have anything you want to bring up, please, if you're here, raise your hand. If you're online, we'll be monitoring the chat, so just drop your questions there. Chris, if you want to come on. Okay.
Thank you, Carrie. Great to be here and excited for this panel. So are you going to be off screen while you ask questions? Or
It's just going to have to be the way that it is, unfortunately. So I thought a really interesting place that everybody's kind of curious about right now is the fundraising landscape today. So could you guys speak a little bit to kind of what the current state of the venture markets are and kind of the deal activity you're seeing and hotspots, headwinds, those sorts of things?
Sure. Lana, do you want to go first?
Yeah, I'll go first. First of all, thank you for having me. Really excited to have this discussion and share the insights. So in terms of the landscape, it is continuing to be a very challenging environment. But the good news, the great companies are still raising and able to get access to funding. We are seeing shifts to later stages. We are seeing shifts to less deals, but the size of those deals is typically larger. What else? It's really important in the current environment to really articulate your validation and traction. So make sure that when you reach out to investors, you are very, very clear what you do and get to that, what your problem solution fit really, really quickly, ideally in the first 2 minutes. The good news is great companies are still able to raise.
I'll add to that, and forgive me, I'll be looking at my live audience, so it may be like I'm not looking right in the camera. Yeah, Lana's right. The last few years, we've seen a move from investors to later stage opportunities. So for example, venture firms that traditionally did only Series A or Series A and Series B have moved to Series C, Series D. And the reason for that is that when the times were good, we created almost too many companies. There were, Series A's were abundant. And what we learned over the last few years, that it was very hard to get another investor to come in to that next round. And so what VCs had to do was they had to focus on their existing portfolio and they didn't have enough money to keep pouring into their existing portfolio. So they rationalized that. They tried to do insider rounds, and if they had funds to invest in new companies, they would typically join a Series B or a Series C, where the company, let's say, had to go through a clinical proof of concept study. And they'd rather invest in that than to do a seed or a Series A of a new company. I use the analogy of, it's kind of like if you have too many babies to feed, the last thing you want to do is create another baby to feed. If you have to, cut kind of Sophie's Choice, you have to cut, your food supply to some of your kids. You don't want to have another kid. And that's generally what we've seen in venture across the board. And then the other piece of it, I'll just add, is that when the IPO window is closed, then that shuts off really one out of two main ways for a venture capitalist to exit. So that means, well, then we have to rely on acquisitions, M&A. And when you really look at when M&A happens, it happens after a clinical proof of concept data set. So that's why everybody's shifting to later stage, because they need to get an exit. And the only way to get an exit is if they can deliver a clinical outcome study in the next 18 months to 2 years, let's say. So hopefully that gives some perspective.
Yeah, and just, to double down on this, I think we also need to make a differentiation between different types of companies in different segments, right, in the life sciences sector. If we're talking about medtech, we're seeing similar shift towards later stage, and strategics are looking for more traction, more commercial traction. If in the past it was, I don't know, 5 to 10 million in revenue, now it's shifting towards 15 to 20 million. So we are seeing similar trends, right, across different segments within the life sciences sector, biotech, medtech, digital health. So it's really important to keep that in mind, because that's going to come up depending on what kind of investor you're going to be pitching to.
Thank you. That's really helpful. And obviously, with some of the investors investing in later stage companies, those that are still investing in some of the earlier ones, I would assume, are being more selective, right? As you'd have to be. So could you guys? This is kind of a big question. So just give us a little bit of an insight into how you evaluate deals, and what's kind of top priorities for you. Could you kind of allude to kind of the timing, the diligence process, kind of the portfolio and fit?
Sure, I'll take that one first. So first, just to put this into perspective of what we've seen in the first half of this year, in Q2, we saw the lowest number and the lowest amount of investment going into seed and Series A in Q2. Q1 looked a little better, but they were dominated by larger rounds and fewer companies. So those trends. However, there is more money on the sidelines ready to invest than we've ever seen. Even traditional venture funds have been able to close their funds this year, hundreds of millions of dollars, right? So there are billions of dollars ready to invest. So it's not that they're not doing early stage investing, but I'd say they are really focused on key differentiating, right, data set milestones. So I'll give you an example. There's been a lot of crowding around validated targets that are really hot, let's say in immune inflammatory disease. Well, if you can show in your preclinical program that you are differentiated from, let's say, a drug that's in the clinic, maybe a drug that's commercially available and generating a lot of revenue, if you can show that through longer half-life extension, more potency and avoiding toxicities, right? Maybe it's a different modality. Maybe it's an oral versus a subcutaneous injection or IV administered. Those differentiating factors, if you can show those early, and you can convince an investor that you need to run those experiments with your $2 million, $5 million, whatever you need in that early round, that could be a compelling case to show that you're going to get to a milestone that's going to deliver a return for those early stage investors.
So at Solas, we first look at the fit. We want to make sure that the space that you're in aligns with our investment strategy. So for example, Solas has invested and has a number of companies in cardiovascular, neurovascular, GI, oncology space. So we sleep and respiratory as well. We understand how to do diligence. This aligns with our skill set, our experience, and our investment strategy. So that's the first question that we typically ask. If you come to us with an opportunity in orthopedics space, it's not going to be an immediate no, but it's going to be probably a quick no after we evaluate it, because we've never invested in orthopedics. So make sure that there is a strategic fit, and make sure that, so at Solas, we invest in both biopharma and medtech, as well as digital health and AI. We expanded into that segment a few years ago. So that aspect is very, very important when you evaluate whether you should approach a VC. What is their investment mandate? Second, we will look at team, we'll look at your science. Those are the other two things that are very, very high on our priority list. And from there, we'll start looking at, if it passes that science committee, we'll start looking at IP. So how differentiated you are, how defensible are your assets. So we'll look at IP, we'll look at your business model, we'll look at your reimbursement and regulatory pathways. So we'll start digging into those kind of details. But again, first and foremost, what's really important for us is that strategic fit with the fund's mandate, team, and science. Have you done validation? What kind of data do you have? On the medtech side, we look to, do you have a prototype? Has it been validated? Do you have access to KOLs? So all of those details are very important to us. Now, timing is also super critical. So you have to keep that in mind, because if you think about the VC business, right? It's a business. We work for limited partners or with limited partners. And most VC funds operate, they raise money, they operate on a 10-year timeline. So we've got maybe 3-4 years to deploy capital. And then we essentially harvest that capital by supporting the companies in the portfolio, but also exit them during the rest of that time frame. So depending on where we are in that cycle, we may look at our portfolio and say, well, first of all, do we have capital to deploy? And then second of all, if we do have capital to deploy, what is the portfolio construct of our fund right now? Because, again, some of you might have heard about this portfolio construct or portfolio approach. Most VCs pursue a balanced portfolio. It may be a mix of different segments, medtech, biopharma, it may be a mix of different stages. So depending on, again, when you approach the fund, it might be a no because they've got too many early stage companies in their portfolio, or they have, met their target for biotech, or for that particular, let's say space, cardiovascular, if you're going after cardiovascular. So all of those moments and details are very important when we are starting to evaluate whether an opportunity is a good opportunity for the fund.
Yeah, let me add one element to what Lana's describing. So another big factor that has been an influence, especially in recent years, I mentioned earlier that if you can't get an exit through an IPO, you really have to rely on M&A to get liquidity and to give money back. And let's even say the IPO window opens. For most funds, whether they're seed funds or Series A, Series B funds, they're going to have 15 to 20 investments. And maybe you could hope that one or two are able to go public. So what has typically happened, and this is generally the case, but particularly in recent years, is every VC has to figure out, are there any natural acquirers that would come and, if we generate good data, would acquire us? And this is true not just in biotech and drugs, but in med tech and others. So you have to have a clear understanding of who would be the buyer if you advance your program and it looks good. And this changes. This is the tough part. Many of us like to be contrarians, but you really have to go where pharma is. And so, cancer has always been a huge area. Many pharma companies interested in cancer. Well, there's been some headwinds in cancer recently, right, for investors, because a lot of those translational data sets don't read out in the clinic. But what has heated up is immune inflammatory, right, disease, cardiometabolic, CNS, ophthalmology, retinal disease. So the good news is we've seen more of a diversity, but even there, for each category, you need to understand what are the pharma companies that would be even interested in talking to us, right? And I can tell you, we're pushing a company in our portfolio that's looking for a Series B, actually a Series A extension. And I'm sending out to all my contacts, and many of them will say, yeah, we're not into that area at all. So we're not even interested in engaging, or it might be an area that has a higher risk, higher reward, like kidney disease or something like that. Many of them will say, we don't invest in that space. There's even a fund that closed recently, Scion Life Sciences. They've had a mandate, we're not going to do any cancer. So you need to understand who are you talking to for the investor side, and understand most of them are going to want to know, how are you going to sell this technology? And that's why we don't see as much in infectious disease. We don't see as much in other areas where there's just not a lot of precedent. There's not a lot of things you can point to say, look at this comparable, look at this valuation in a public market, look at how much money was paid for this company, in that space.
Great point.
That's all really useful. And a couple themes pop out there, timing being a big one, right? And some of that we have control over, some of it we don't, right? There are just larger macro trends that take place. As we've got a lot of earlier startups here in the audience, is the right time for folks to start engaging with VCs? And how important is it to build relationships with VCs, and how should folks go about that? I'm assuming earlier is probably better.
Lana, you want to take that one first?
Yes, so there are two questions there. When is the right time to invest? So I'll tackle that one first. What I say to the founders that I work with is the right time to invest is when you can clearly articulate what you're going to achieve, what milestones specifically you're going to focus on, and over, how you're going to deploy the capital. So what VCs are interested in is we're interested in knowing what capital or the capital that we're going to deploy, what is it going to help you achieve? Is it going to help you get to your regulatory milestone? Is it going to help you complete your phase 1, phase 2, etc.? So when we deploy capital, it's milestone driven. So when you are able to articulate how our capital can help you achieve those milestones, that's the right time to invest. And I typically say that it's 12 to 18 months. So you're looking at funding yourself or your venture over the course of 12 to 18 months. There is some buffer there as well, but focus on that tangible milestone. And ideally, you don't want to raise too early because that's going to dilute you prematurely. So you want to have enough data, enough validation that they, funded maybe via angels or non-dilutive sources. And then you go to institutional investors like Chris and I, and you show that data, and essentially you articulate your plan to deploy capital towards those milestones. And we can talk about specific milestones as well, maybe later on if that's of interest, because those milestones are different depending on if you're a biotech or biopharma company versus medtech versus digital health. The metrics that we are looking for or at are very different. And again, that's something to keep in mind as you talk to different VCs, because again, it's not one size fits all approach. You've got to modify your deck. You've got to adjust your deck depending on who you talk to.
Yeah, and I'll just add a couple elements on top of what Lana described. So first, if you have not raised any equity capital, you've not gone to a seed fund or even an angel network. If you're trying to go out and raise money for the first time that isn't non-dilutive, you really need to prepare your pitch, because you may not get another opportunity. Because if you pitch and you get a bunch of no's, you're not going to have the money to generate more data. And it's going to be hard to go back, because the first question every fund asks is there anything new than the last time we looked at it? And it's not going to be enough to say, oh, we reformatted it and we've got a better story now. And like, that's usually not going to cut it, because they're going to be focused on the data that you've generated on whether or not to invest. So the old adage, measure twice, cut once. You don't want to go out, especially to your target investors, if you haven't practiced it, shown it in front of maybe second tier or third tier or your network to get feedback on your pitch. The other thing is as it relates to non-dilutive capital, you want to try to gather as much of that as possible, whether it's grant money, whether it's foundations, whether it's entering contests, whether it's friends and family, founders capital. And the reason for that is you want to create what I call an uneven playing field, okay? If you think about all of the great ideas that are out there, right? And all of the publications that might have driven an idea for a new company. What you want to do by getting non-dilutive capital is you want to generate more and more data. And it doesn't mean you're going to get a higher valuation, okay? What it does mean that you've increased the likelihood that your company is going to get picked over the other 20 that firm might be looking for. So you want to create an uneven playing field and generate as much data as you can, and use that money wisely, right? That's hard to recover if you get a bunch of capital and you mess it up, or, we see this a lot, right? They'll do a mouse study with not enough subjects and a single dose, and we're like, wow, you don't have a control. We don't even know if you have a dose response, right? Like, so you need to make sure whatever you do early, that experimental design is very tight and compelling. And then the other thing I'll say is, if you're fortunate enough to have enough interest to get a seed investment round, particularly in the environment we've been in, try to get a syndicate together, okay? Or at least a seed investor that can put money into the next round. The hardest challenge is let's say you want to raise $2 million and you get a regional seed fund to put $2 million in, but they're like, hey, our fund's only 20 million, so we can't put any more money in. Well, now you've got to go out and raise the next round to brand new investors, and they're going to ask, is your existing investor putting anything in? Well, no, they don't have enough. That's not a good position. If let's say you raise 5 million and you're able to get 5 seed investors for $1 million each, okay? Well, if they have enough capacity to invest in the next round, you've got what's called an insider round, right? So when you need to raise a $10 million Series A, they may be able to put or reserve enough capital to keep that program going. So you have to think about these things. Now, at the end of the day, you may not have that option. There may be only one person who's ready to invest, and you got to take that money. I would just say do the best that you can with whatever money you have in the company to use it wisely, get good counsel, make sure you don't waste that, and you drive the right milestones that will attract the next round of investors.
And Chris, just to add to that very quickly, if Carrie allows, as VCs, we often look at this risk-return dynamic, right? The higher the risk, the higher the expected return, or what we expect to deliver. So it's in your interest to generate data, to generate or get as much validation or traction as possible early on, because that's going to raise your pre-money valuation. Yeah. So that's what you want to focus on.
Yeah, and I'll go further to give you a very simple example. And Carrie, this is a good interaction, so I hope it's okay that we continue to go. So if you're sitting across from an investor, it doesn't matter if you're raising $500,000, $5 million, or $50 million, okay? I can tell you in most cases, they're trying to think, how is this person going to create 3 to 5x value with the money and the check that I write them, okay? Regardless of the size. Because as Lana described, it's a portfolio approach. They're expecting some are going to go to zero. They may only get their money back on some investments, right? Some might be outsized, but they have to look at each investment, generally speaking, of a 3 to 5x, knowing that not all of them are going to deliver that. But if they don't believe that the money that they give you is going to generate that, if everything works, they're probably going to move on and try to invest in something else.
Next 5x all the way through to an exit.
No. 3 to 5x generally to the next round. I'll give you an example. Let's say you got a great company, a lot of preclinical data, great founding team, and they're arguing that they deserve a $10 million pre-money value, okay? If they're asking for 10 million in a Series A, just to use as an example, okay, well, they're giving up half the company, the post money is 20 million, you times that by 3 to 5x, so that would be 60 to 100 million. So if you take 10 million, now you got a 20 million, if you need to create a 3 to 5x, let's say conservatively 3x, right? You need to prove to that investor that, you know what, if we do all this right, I guarantee you I can get an investor to invest in this company at a $60 million pre-money value, right? Now, investors are also realistic. If they get, let's say, a 1.5 step up, but a great investor's coming in and they're able to put more money in and protect some of the dilution, then they might do what you're describing, which is calculate, well, what are we going to see at the end of a Series B? Are we going to get our 3 to 5x return? But generally, they kind of want to see that in the next turn, if you can. It's a good rule of thumb. Yeah. So I'll let.
Chris,
So the
we
question
don't
is.
hear the questions in the room.
Let me repeat the question. Great, Carrie, to highlight that. The question is, how do you determine a pre-money value in a seed or early round? And Lana, I'll let you describe further how you guys do it. We look at comparables, okay, for the most part. There's a lot of data out there and that show that they stay in a pretty narrow band, okay, for early stage opportunities, particularly if you're dealing with preclinical. There's other factors we look at, okay? One is, do you have a development candidate or not? Is it well characterized? I'm talking drug, but you can make the same case for a device or what have you. Do you have the final product that you plan to bring into the clinic, okay? How good is the translational data that you've generated? Is it convincing enough to make someone believe that, okay, this could actually work if it moves forward in the clinic? Those translational models will also be a factor. How reliable and how predictive those translational models. So, for example, in infectious disease, we know if an antiviral works in a dish, it's going to work in an animal and it's going to work in a human. But that's very different than CNS or cancer, where there's very little predictive power. And then you've got, what is your target? Is it validated or unvalidated? That's another factor. How crowded is the space? Are people interested in this area? You see a lot of obesity drugs, right, getting bought for a lot. So those will move up the comps if there's scarcity value and a desire to go after a new area or new targets. So it's multifactorial, but generally speaking, there's a range, and it's not going to deviate too much from that unless you're, I don't know, like a John Marganore, CEO who started a company. Well, he might be able to demand a higher pre-money because it's a well-known executive to argue for that. But Lana, how do you guys think about that?
Yeah, no, we approach it in a similar way. Valuation ranges are tied to your development stage. And we have a very good idea per sector where those ranges lie based on our experience investing ourselves or what we are seeing in the market. That data is easily accessible. So via PitchBook or some of the other companies, So I generally encourage founders to be well educated and review that kind of data. Even if you don't have access to pitch books, you can generally ask VCs that you talk to, what ranges are you seeing currently for seed stage startups in this particular sector? And what are the key drivers in, those ranges? You should be aware that if you raise on the West Coast, there is a premium. So if you're willing to travel to the West Coast and identify, and are fortunate to identify a VC who's willing to lead you around, you're gonna get maybe 20-30% step up versus what you can get on the East Coast. That's fairly common knowledge. What else is going to impact your pre-money? Probably if you're going to have an AI with digital components. So AI, like you said, if you're in the obesity space, you're probably going to get a premium. If you have an AI with digital components, so there's a lot of demand, there is a lot of interest in those kind of technologies right now. So you may get some premium depending on what kind of data you have. And I have to emphasize, because I lead AI and digital investments, I can tell you that VCs are a lot smarter in how they evaluate those deals. They're a lot more selective, and they do a lot more digging into what kind of data you have. So it's not just putting AI on your page or on your deck and hoping for the best. It's really, it's about showing validation. It's about showing traction and scalability.
Yeah, I just want to add one thing to this. You're not going to win any points for trying to be aggressive with your pre-money value. I can tell you, we often believe this just happened, we had an investment committee this morning, and we go through all of the outstanding potential deals. And somebody was looking for a very high pre-money value on not much data at all, nothing close to comparables. We literally laugh, like we don't even want to engage, because we already come to the conclusion, this is an unsophisticated group. They really don't understand. They probably have never raised money before. So like, you're going to hurt yourself if you think, well, if I started at 50 million pre-money, maybe I can negotiate down to 20. People will not want to engage with you if they believe you're not credible and you don't understand kind of the price discovery in the market.
Yeah, I think credibility is a huge and important factor, wouldn't you say, Chris? Right. So we obviously look at your team, and so that signals credibility. If you have the right experience and skill set, you might have worked in the past before, you've got the right credentials, that signals credibility, right? Advisory boards and access to KOLs, that signals credibility, right?
Yep.
We also look at your transparency or your how you assess current risks. If you kind of wave them away and say, well, let's not worry about them right now, that's a red flag for us, right? That's, that makes you less credible, because there are always risks. We, as VCs, we are in de-risking business. So if you waive those, risks, we're like, that's a bit of a problem. So my advice to founders is address risks head on. There are risks, there are many risks, but here's what we've done about them, and here is what we're going to do next. How does that line up with your thinking or experience? Put them on the table and make sure that everybody's clear about what you are doing, what you have done, what you're going to do next. And if there are any pivots, then you can say, well, hey, here's what I've done. Here are the pivots that I am considering. Nobody expects you to execute on your plan perfectly, right? We expect pivots, but we also, what we expect is we expect fast fails, right, Chris? And
Yep.
quick learning, transparency, collaborative approach, making sure that if you have done a pivot, you learn from it quickly and you articulate to us how we can help you to get to that next milestone.
Sure.
Could you expound on the, setting the credible valuation idea? So when we've got companies that have, gone through, multiple, federal grants, building, up to certain milestones, and then maybe they have two safes or, some combination of safes in the door. So no valuations has been set yet, but there are dollars in the door.
Yeah.
Are they better off not setting a valuation or not even planning a valuation and talking to you saying, what do you think? Or do they have to start somewhere and you just got to roll the dice and say, this is the best info I have, and I'm going to try to not shoot too high, but not be ridiculous.
Yeah.
You got to start something.
Yeah, well, no, right. And look, safes are, better than these, more enriched, right? Convertible notes, right? So safes are a good start. We'll look at anything that might have a safe note in it. It's not our preference, but I would say the biggest factor is who is behind those safe notes? How credible and sophisticated are they as investors? Do they have relationships with institutional investors where we're going to respect them, right, more because their experience, maybe it's a, biotech executive that's been around and, made a lot of money on his own, et cetera. We're going to respect that more than, an angel that was in your neighborhood and doesn't know anything about the industry. I mean, unfortunately, they're the ones who are going to be like, we don't care that they're not going to make any money, right? This is what we want to do. So I'd say you should go to safes if you can't argue for a good value for an equity round, unless those safe note issuers are also ready, because there are some of these funds that prefer to start with safe and then they have more money to put in. And that's the best scenario. If they're like, okay, we're going to have the safe, but we're also going to put in another 5 million in the next round, that's a better scenario to hold the credibility and hold the value that you want to keep for that equity round. I hope that answers your question.
So when determining your valuation, what is your definition of validated data? Is it FDA approval? Is it a blinded powered study, pre-de novo or 510K?
Yeah. Yeah, it's a good. Yeah. So
Chris,
the
what's the
question was, I had mentioned that we're going to look at how validated is the technology or target in assessing our interest in investing in the pre-money value. And so the question was, what do you mean by validated? What does that require? So let's take drugs as an example, okay? If it's a target that has led to an FDA-approved drug that is on the market, let's say selling $500 million or $1 billion, right? That's very validated, right? And you have to figure out how differentiated can I be. So we're an investor in a company called Avalyn. They're taking 2 approved products, pirfenidone and nintedanib for IPF and progressive pulmonary fibrosis, and making it a nebulized formulation for local delivery because they're very toxic drugs, right? So we kind of know exactly what the bar is. We need to know what we need to clear. We need to know what is going to be adopted in the marketplace. But that's a validated, not just target, but validated drugs that we're actually moving forward. Sometimes it doesn't require an FDA-approved drug, but they've got a great data set, right? And there you have to filter it through what therapeutic category is it? Like, for example, I mean, we saw the PD-1 VEGF get a lot of fanfare and then the bloom fell off the rose a bit. So we don't want to rush. And that's true in oncology, whether it was going back to IDO or CD47 or TIGIT, right? So like in cancer, the bar is very high to prove a new validated target. But in other areas, if you see, let's take schizophrenia and Karuna, right? There's a lot of people trying to figure out how can we become a better, right? Karuna schizophrenia drug. So I'd say it really depends. I think clinical data is the ultimate validating. a robust clinical proof of concept study that's I call beyond reproach. Enough patients, enough safety database, enough follow-up where this is real. And that's when pharma comes in, or big biotech, because they're like, okay, this is a drug. I don't know when, but it's going to make it onto the market because the phase 2 data set's really good. That's what I would call a validated target. And that's where we saw in obesity, right? From the GLP-1s and the, variations off of that and other targets is, nipping at the heels of something that, wow, this is going to be tens of billions, if not hundreds of billions of dollar market category. So I hope that answers your question.
Chris, and we have a couple of questions online. I'm not sure if you see them. One of them is about, what if a cap table has an inactive founder holding a large block of stock, 40%? How do you view and handle this if you have interest in the company, if at all? So on the, is it a problem? Like, if we are interested in the company, would we pass on this opportunity because of this? I would say no. We'll work with you. We'll figure out how to handle this. There are ways to handle this. I think it's more of a question for you, right? As a co-founder, do you want to have your co-founder who's inactive on the cap table, or is there something that you can really negotiate with him or her to onboard them? So I think it really depends on the inactive full stop, right, permanently, or are they going to come back? So I think this is something that you as a founder or co-founder would really need to evaluate, because that's a lot of equity. And as the company grows in value, that's when you start feeling like, is this really equitable? I'm the one who's driving the company and putting in my heart and soul into this. I think that's more of a question from the structure, venture standpoint. Can we work with this? We can. So that would be my answer. Chris, what's your take?
Lana, I think you hit the nail on the head, and I'll try to add kind of examples to this. So I remember years ago, we had a group of 5 postdocs from MIT, I think George Church's lab, come into our office. And it was very, nice that they wanted to be equitable. They're like, we're 5 co-founders. We thought of this idea together. We each have 20% equity on the cap table. And me and my colleagues are thinking to ourselves, none of them are ever going to make any money on this. Like, what are they thinking? This is not a good approach to a startup. And we almost said, look, if you have a good idea, you're better going off to Flagship and raising $200 million for your platform, and understand you guys are going to have nothing in the stock, but it'll be a great experience. You can get experience. They'll probably allow you to be part of the team. You can then become an entrepreneur later. So we really try to coach that, as best as you can. Ideally, 1 founder we love, okay? 2 founders, I would say max. If you've got more than that who are expecting to participate in big ways, right? That's tough to make the math work, okay? But what Lana hit the nail on the head on was, we look at who is on the cap table. So let's say we use this advisor, and this guy gave us some advice, and we gave them 5%, and we're like, look, we coach them, don't do that, right? Just like, don't do anything with giving out equity until you are ready to raise money. And then you can figure out how to assemble a team of consultants, advisors, staff, et cetera. Because most, especially in this environment, people need to run lean. They don't want big teams. They don't want you to hire full-time people. A lot of people are out of work. They're ready to take a fractional role or a board seat or an advisor role without much. And you can kind of defer that promise. So what we do to solve for it is what Lana was referring to, which is, we look at who are the real contributors here. So let's say there's 6 people on the cap table that have equity. Who's going to be really carrying the water on this company, right? And even though they may be diluted, there are ways that we can give them more stock, okay? And give them, it might be vesting over time. It may be in the form of warrants or options, but it's going to be a good valuation. And that's how we don't care so much about the founders that aren't doing anything. And we really focus on, okay, you've got a the CEO and somebody who's really going to lead the scientific piece of it. We want to make sure you two are taken care of. And when we make this round, everybody's going to be diluted, but don't worry, we're going to sweeten the pot for the two of you who are going to be moving forward, right? There's a lot of different mechanisms and ways to do that, but that's generally how investors look at it, is who's really going to be adding value. And we don't care that much if they were just part of the original idea or on the patent. I mean, I'm sorry, you know, no one's going to get rich on just being part of an early startup idea.
Chris, we have one more question, if Kira is okay with this.
Yeah, please.
What information do you recommend putting in our pitch decks? Is there anything we shouldn't put in?
Yeah.
So
I'll take a stab at this one first, Lana, because I speak about this a lot. So, and again, every VC is different, so Lana may have a different view, but I like to say a third, a third, a third, and it may be, it might be 30%, 40% in the middle, and 25% in the end. But what that third, a third, a third is, and this is the crux of what anybody wants to see. A third is, what is your technology? What's the target? Is there proof of mechanism? Are there other papers or validation of that approach? And why are you differentiated? What is it that you're actually trying to sell? The second piece, and the most important, are what we would describe as the money slides, which is the data. Convince us, right? Nobody invests in bad science. So everything that gets investing, there's some modicum of interesting, right, data out there, publication, what have you. So you need to make sure that you make that data set as compelling as possible. We as venture investors, early venture investors, it's more art than science, right? There's an old adage, the less you know about a product, the better it looks. We're taking a mouse study and a patient cell line, some PK, and trying to figure out, is this going to work in the clinic? Yeah, that's very hard to do. So understand, you need to make sure that early data, and what I said earlier, don't waste that early capital or early non-dilutive capital. Do the right experiments in the right way, make it most compelling. The third piece is, if you've convinced them that, okay, this could actually work, the third piece is, okay, use the proceeds. What are you going to do? What are you going to do next? You're going to take my money? Are you going to hit a milestone? Are you going to de-risk this further? Am I going to get a value increase? And that, a lot of people, you'd be surprised how many ignore that. They're just like, this is cool science and here's some data. Okay, well, why are you raising $2 million? What are you going to do with that, right? And it has to be a value creating thing. You can't say, well, we need to pay all of our salaries and we've got a team of 5 ready, and literally we hear this sometimes, and we have a CMC and we need to produce some drug supply. Okay, so you're going to take my money and you're going to produce really zero value in the program, right? So you have to think, maybe you're not asking for enough. Maybe you need to raise 10 million, right, to be able to do what you need to do. And I'd say what not to do. Don't try to tell us how commercially viable, a drug for cancer is going to be and what our peak sales is going to be, or we're going to price the drug for this rheumatoid arthritis drug at X, and this is our calculation, right? Like, I've seen the TAMs and the SAMs and the SOMs. Like, honestly, we don't need to see that as early investors, okay? So I'd say pull it back on the commercial opportunity, unless it's an area that nobody's invested in, you don't understand it, and it's kind of a white space. That's when you can lean in and say, let me explain the market, because not many people understand this market. IP is for a subsequent call, right? Don't go into great biographies on the team. And here's my rule of thumb. If you have an hour meeting and you haven't gotten to that data slide yet in that middle section, after 15 minutes, you might have lost the audience, okay? So don't, like, the genesis story, the team, the size of the market, the mechanism, and they're looking at their watch, and you've wasted a lot of time before you've even gotten to a compelling data slide. The last thing I'll say, and Lana, I want to hear your thoughts, is I coach people, when this happens real world, if you have an hour meeting, your presentation without interruption should be no more than 40 minutes. If you have a 45-minute meeting, it should be no more than 30 minutes, okay? If you have a 30-minute meeting, you better not be more than 20 minutes, okay? And sometimes it's like, oh, I'm sorry, we're late. We had an important emergency call. You've only got 20 minutes. You better know how to adjust that 30-slide deck and cut it in half. What are the 15 slides you're going to use if you have half the time? What are the 5 slides you would show, right, if you're like really rushed? If you were in an elevator and you're trying to pitch somebody, what 2 slides would you show, right? And so you really need to be really prepared and focused on how you do that pitch, or what we would call an elevator pitch. But Lana, would love to hear your thoughts.
Kira, I think we're going to need a separate session on our pet peeves, on what not to put in the decks, but I'll just focus on several things that I do want to see. And I think the best pitches get to the point in the first 5 minutes, maybe even less. So if you can articulate clearly your problem, your solution, why you and why now in the first 5 minutes, you know, that's your hook. I'm there, then I'm interested, then I'm asking questions. Ideally, it's back and forth. It's not just you talking at me for 40 minutes, but it's also going to help you gauge how interested I am if I'm asking questions. So encourage that back and forth at the beginning of the meeting, so that, you know, the investors on the other side feel comfortable asking you questions. And, you know, 50 slides, I would say no go. But one thing that before we shift, you have to make sure that your slide deck, your pitch, is tailored not only to the type of investor that you're talking to, but how you're going to deliver that pitch deck. So if it's coming to me via email and you're just reaching out cold, which happens, I want something that I can quickly scan. If you just send me images, it's very difficult for me to decipher based on the titles, right? Slide titles. Those slide titles matter and images matter when you are in person, because you're going to deliver that voiceover. But if I'm getting something via email, I need to be able to quickly read and figure out if, you know, clearly the problem, solution, why now fits into what I'm looking for.
Yeah, the simple goal is, your goal is to get the next meeting, okay? And what Lana described, if you share too little, you're not going to get the next meeting. If you share too much, you may not get that next meeting, right? You want to tell a good story where they're like, ooh, this is interesting. I want to see more. Do you have a data room? Can we go into greater detail with some of the data you mentioned that you didn't put in your presentation? The goal is to get another meeting. That means they're engaged. You've won them at the high level. And when I say if you don't share enough, they're going to be like, I don't even know if they have anything. I don't want to waste another hour of my time if they haven't even given me a reason to have enough meetings. So there's an art to this, of how you engage them to say, we want to talk again, okay?
And I think that's super important if you're reaching out cold and via email.
Yeah, that's really helpful. I guess along that line, you know, are there things that can help founders stand out, right? I mean, you kind of touched on some things to do, but are there any things that particularly make founders stand out when they're engaging with investors?
Yeah, I'll say most investors, because we work with a lot of first-time CEOs, entrepreneurs early in their career. We're not expecting them to be able to walk into a mature biotech and be a CEO, right? But we are expecting them to have something to bring to the table, right? And so for a lot of CEOs and entrepreneurs, we want them to understand their technology, their disease area, the competitive landscape, right? If this is their passion and this is their drive, and they're, you know, putting their time and energy into this, we want to walk away feeling like, wow, they really understand what needs to be done, right? But they don't have to have all the skill sets, like checking the box on all that. So then we look at, okay, 2 things. Are they appropriately humble? Okay, so in other words, we want them to have confidence in what they know. We also want them to know what they don't know, right? So they're like, well, we need to hire somebody who's CMC because it's not an area I know. Oh, well, we know some people at CMC, or maybe they have an advisor that they've used and we can judge whether that could be a good advisor or not. So we want, so the second thing we look for is, Are they open to surrounding themselves with the expertise that they need, that they don't have, right? So that's what I mean, appropriate level of humility. We want someone confident. We don't want somebody, well, I don't know how to develop this. What do you guys think we should go after, right? We want a point of view, but we don't want them so dogmatic. We're like, we're not going to be able to invest in this CEO. They're just too, right? They're going to be immovable, right? They think they're right and they don't realize what they don't know. So it's a little bit of this nuanced approach where we want a CEO and an entrepreneur to pitch and make them feel like we really understand. And one of the little barometers of that is, we look at dozens of opportunities every week, right? And we often we'll have a target and we'll look in our database. We have 8 companies we've talked to in the last year. If that CEO who's pitching that same target isn't aware of the competitive landscape, that's a red flag, right? If they just think that, I've got this great drug. Well, do you know there's 5 other companies that have already received Series A and are ahead of you? If they don't understand the competitive landscape, that's a red flag. And we're going to be we're going to know that it's not competitive. So the more that CEO can pitch and demonstrate that I know this space better than anybody you're going to meet, and this is why we think our drug or our technology is going to stand out. So that's how I would describe it, Lana.
I love it. I completely agree. I also would like to add that you've got to bring this unique vision perspective to the table. So if you're going after cardiovascular space, for example, we know that in and out. So if you bring unique new insights that make us think or get that aha moment, that's huge. I think that it's really important that founders articulate this big vision that is defensible and believable. So we want founders who think big, but also ground themselves in a reality and are transparent, like I mentioned earlier about risks and how they're thinking through different pivots. And the other thing that's super important and helps founders stand out is when they understand that venture is a long game. It's a long game. It's all about patience. It's not necessarily about being aggressive all the time, and it's about relationships. So calibrating your expectations, making sure that you don't take no personally, and invest into building those relationships over time. I think Carrie might have asked these questions earlier, and Chris, you and I failed to address that. But venture is a relationship game, and you have to do that over time. The best way to do this is by getting a warm intro through either one of the portfolio companies or through one of the advisors, and then continuing to nurture that relationship through conferences or meetings over time. As you might have heard, ask for advice and you'll get money. And if you get, ask for money, you'll get advice. Leverage that to your advantage. And I would say, again, I mentioned that we are in the de-risking business. If you're able to establish a relationship and if you're able to show that you are able to consistently and predictably de-risk and deliver on your milestones over, let's say, the course of 6 months, and then you approach us, I think that's the best thing you can do to stand out from the crowd.
Yeah, I'll just add one thing about the relationship, and this goes to both sides of the equation. It's the kind of don't be a jerk. And there are VCs who think, I don't care about it. We're never going to invest in this technology. But then that CEO might come back with something else right down the road that they're going to remember how they were treated. So we try not to ghost anybody. We try to treat them all with a lot of respect. We try to give them feedback. On the same token, there are people out there who badmouth VCs. They're like, oh, they didn't treat me well. Well, you got to be careful because we've invested in CEOs or entrepreneurs that have come back with a different technology, even though we said no the first time, right? So, you want to keep those relationships going, be respectful, because they might be interested in the next thing you bring to the table. And sometimes you can damage those. I mean, there are, entrepreneurs we'll never work with. The way those interactions went, we don't want to invest in somebody like that, right? So just understand it goes both ways, and you want to kind of treat everybody with respect in those interactions.
Yes, it's actually a really great segue for the next question I had. I want to flip it a little bit here, right? We've talked a lot about how VCs are evaluating who they're going to be investing in and the founders. Could you share a little bit about how founders should be assessing the VCs they're approaching and the things they should be considering here?
Yeah. Well, they should always love Solas and Xontogeny because we're really, really good VCs. I'm kidding. But Lana, why don't you take that one first? How should entrepreneurs assess VCs?
It's a two-way street. I often say that it's a long game, and I've mentioned that before. So you want to make sure that you assess not only for fit in terms of does this fund have the right capital or capital, period. Can they add to my company in terms of skill set, experience? Can they, since they're going to be probably on your board, what can I learn from them? Can they introduce me into KOLs, etc.? So that's a key consideration. Is this a good fit for you culturally? For your company? I would also encourage you to reach out to CEOs of other portfolio companies of that firm and find out what it's like to have them on their board, what they're like when things get tough, when pivots are necessary, when you do not deliver on the plan that you said you're going to deliver. What happens? Are they cheering you on and you are, you're kind of in the same boat, you feel like you're in the same boat with them, or do they take a different approach? So I think that diligence matters, and ideally you do that ahead of reaching out to the to those kind of investors. But I'm very, very conscious that being an early stage founder, if you're a first time founder, it's really tough to hit on all of these points. And Chris, you've been an operator, I've been an operator. You just you start with a wider funnel and you don't get to everything perfectly, but that's okay. What you're doing right now, kind of coming to these sessions and start engaging in this conversation. I think this is a great first step.
Yeah, I don't have too much to add to what Lana described. She's spot on everything she said. I think it's okay to even ask for references. Can you give me some names of some CEOs that you've worked with and invested in to understand, and you can even position it as, I want to get a better understanding of the best way to communicate with you and to have dialogue and all of that. You can make it constructive and not that you're, trying to find some flaws in them. The other thing is that each venture fund will have a different view on whether they want to invest in a first-time CEO or someone who hasn't been a part of a C-suite of a very successful biotech. We lean into the entrepreneur because I'm going to play a pretty active role. I'm going to tell them, I'm going to sit on your board. I'm going to make sure you don't make mistakes. I'm going to coach and mentor you along the way, right, to make sure that we're all successful. Whereas a lot of VCs are like, I'm only going to, populate the companies we invest in with credible, right, experienced executives. So you have to kind of know who you're talking to. And if you are talking to an investor who loves your technology and they've never really supported a first-time CEO, I think you open up the dialogue. Well, wait, it looks like you like to bring in a CEO from the outside. Are you going to do that with me? I mean, it's always the elephant in the room on both sides, right? Is this person good enough to pull this off if we have to go public with this company? And the person in the entrepreneur, is he going to or she going to replace me the first chance that we have a hiccup? So I think it's okay to have that dialogue and figure out, right, what is their feeling about surrounding that entrepreneur with the right people versus replacing. And sometimes, and we've had this conversation with a founding CEO. We said, look, we're going to invest, but we want to do a search for a much more high profile CEO, and we want to support you as the COO or CTO, or in this case. And but we didn't do that after the fact. We said, look, you can turn us down, but we're ready to invest, but this is the condition. Now, I have to admit, some VCs will say, well, let's just get the deal and then we'll worry about that later and replace them later. We try to be very transparent up front. So kind of, it's okay to ask that question if you're a first time, early in your career CEO.
You're coming in together, you have that conversation with them, just be transparent. We want to come in and you feel that the CEO needs to move off. How do you work that with co-investors?
Well, yeah, I'm sorry. So the question is when co-investors are coming in, you may have different opinions about the readiness or, capabilities of the CEO. So how do you navigate that? Did I get that question right? Okay, yeah. So that is usually when changes are made, when new investors, particularly when you deal with institutional investors, right? So I'll give an example. If somebody knows that I'm playing an active role, I'm a public company CEO, been at Gilead, Celgene, I have a lot of skills to bring to the table. If they know I'm literally on weekly meetings with this team and guiding it, and they know who I am, they're going to be less concerned. If they don't know me or my background, and they look at the CEO, they might be like, look, we know a lot of folks, and I know a lot of folks who could step in as CEO, and that's usually a condition for their investment. Now, sometimes that is a discussion behind the scenes. Hey, we're going to invest, but we need to replace the CEO. What's the right time for that? Who wants to have that conversation? When do we have that conversation? But if you are a CEO, particularly a first-time CEO entrepreneur, you have to recognize that. And so if you're about to get a big round with some big institutional investors who are big names, you should say, I'm a little concerned that they don't believe that I can manage this much money and all of this, these board members. So if they're not bringing it up, I would bring it up and say, look, I just want to understand, am I going to be supported, right? They're never going to sign anything in, right? Gold to say you're safe. No one, and any CEO can be fired on any given day, but they will at least tell you, if you push them to be honest, what their thoughts are. Well, we think you're good enough for the next year and a half, but if we want to take this company public, we think it's going to be hard to convince, public equity investors to come in and put, $150 million or $300 million into an IPO with you at the helm, right? I've seen it both ways. Sometimes they grow into it, and I've really made it my mission to prepare the next generation of CEOs. Some of them make the cut, some of them don't, right? So that's how I would approach it, is just keep that open dialogue and that transparency with those investors. Lana, how do you guys manage that with CEOs that are founders and may not have the same level of experience?
Well, so I think you addressed it nicely. I would think so. What I like to tell founders is that when you are negotiating a round, it's an opportunity for you to see how those investors work. And it's a test, it's a gauge whether you are going to be able to work well together. So, and it's a two-way street. We as investors are evaluating founders, how they negotiate. If we hit a bump, does it become an elephant, or can we constructively work through this issue quickly and constructively, right? So I would say it's really important to pay attention to how, use open dialogue for sure. If you have an issue, if you have a question, I think you should ask that question. And, this is a very, very important topic. So getting a perspective from different investors within your syndicate, how they're going to address it is important. And you're going to know during that time, do the investors, different investors within the syndicate see eye to eye on certain, on that particular topic? Is there a disagreement? Do you have a board member or somebody in the mix who can moderate this, who can facilitate it? If you have an issue like this on the board, typically a chairman, an independent, comes in and tries to resolve this. So it's really, I think, this is a test. This is an opportunity for you to see, like, during the negotiations, how do they work together? And ultimately, in my experience, some syndicates just don't work because they can't agree. And some syndicates fall apart before ideally you get a signature on that term sheet, right? Or investment agreements. But sometimes you get through, with some early stage founders, first time founders, they don't have enough experience. So you kind of get through the entire process, you get to your first board meeting, and it's not what you expect. So I would say it's diligence on both sides all the way until you have money in the bank.
Yeah, and just to add to that point, this is why I prefer smaller boards. You get to, and it's contrary to what he said. If you can get a good diverse investor base, that's good. But sometimes you can have an investor who hasn't put as much money in, they don't deserve a board seat. So you want to keep your board pretty tight. Having a strong chair, right? Red flags if we have a first-time CEO and who also wants to be chair, and they're arguing about controlling votes in the board, right? It's not going to be sustained, right? If you want money, you're going to have to perform to keep that role. But I'd say try to think about your board dynamics, as Lana said, keep it smaller, ideally, and people who really are going to add value and have your back. And that's where a good chair can kind of manage some of the dissonance or disagreement that might occur across other board members. Yeah. I haven't seen that as a negative, right? I think it actually adds a lot of flexibility to the investor, and often it's a relief. Now they might say, actually, I think you are ready to be CEO for now, but we appreciate that you're ready to step aside if we feel it's the right time. But so oftentimes it's like, we don't need to get an outside CEO. It's going to complicate things. Let's just work together on this. But I've never seen that as a negative, like you're not confident enough. It shows the level of humility that I don't know everything. And they might even say, actually, you know more than you realize, and what we need in a CEO. So I wouldn't worry too much about that as a concern of them not to invest, because you're ready to turn over the realm, the helm to somebody else.
Chris, I do want to add to this. I've seen scenarios where CEOs were not convinced. When a CEO comes and says, I want to raise money, I want to close this, but I'm going to step aside, that sometimes, not always, that signals lack of conviction. And that's an issue.
Yeah, well, I would agree. Step aside is one thing versus I want to be the number two, right, and stay involved. Because if it's like a researcher who's got 10 different companies and they don't want to like get involved in one specific one, you're right, that's a red flag. But I'd say, generally, right, especially if it's a scientist, right, and they realize they don't think they have the skills to do drug development and manage regulatory and CMC, that's where we'll be like, okay, they understand what they don't know. But I agree, if they're like, hey, I don't want this at all, I don't need a full-time role, like you guys find somebody, yeah, that's more of a founder that, passive founder where, okay, we'll build the team around it. And it still might not be a negative. It's all about how much equity do they want to keep, and is it appropriate? Yeah. Yeah, so the question was about IP and how much due diligence do we do around IP, what's required, what's needed. Look, IP has, and I'm just going to make it clear, has zero value, okay, to justify value. But it isn't the ante to play the game, okay? So you're not going to say, look at this patent, this is worth $10 million pre-money. Nobody looks at it that way. You need to have a defensible freedom to operate, right? It can be a method of use. Ideally, like if it's a drug, we want, new chemical entity. We want good protection. If it's kind of a, like a gene therapy or genetic technology where maybe the scaffold is off patent, you better have good, right, transcript that's on patent, or different mechanisms, or a capsid or something like that if it's a gene therapy. So we just look at what is described as ring fencing if it's not a foolproof. But I'd say generally, if we have concerns about the space, and we'll do the cursory searches to understand if we need to dig deeper, then we will invest a little bit into that. Oftentimes the companies will have the position paper of the legal firm that put together the IP that they'll go out and they'll share that with us. So it really depends on how much we're investing, how competitive the space is, what red flags have been raised. And then oftentimes, if it's a later stage investment, we will rely on the other investors who did their due diligence. We might do a little bit additional, but honestly, at that point, you've kind of won the game, all right? I'm not saying that everything gets invested, they don't care about IP, but IP is kind of the last thing we typically think about on whether to invest. We assume they're going to have good freedom to operate. We assume the patents are going to be good. And that's kind of the last piece of our due diligence before we, sign the deal and transfer the money. And sometimes that could be a month if we have to go to an outside. But again, don't think that the IP you've created is really the value of the company. That's what you need just to play the game. But Lana, I don't know how you guys think about that.
Chris, I'm going to disagree with you on that.
Yeah.
I think IP has value, but I do agree that, we typically, it's the last step in the process. We do assume that you're going to have freedom to operate and you have IP because, that's the moat that everyone looks for. I have to say, in this current environment, IP, defensible IP matters even more. So I would not underestimate the value of IP. I do have examples where we did not invest. I did not invest into companies that had questionable IP. So I think it's important to keep in mind. I also think that it depends on the type of the company, right? When it comes to biotech, biopharma, IP is more important than when it comes to pure AI or digital. Even in AI and digital, we are seeing, depending on what, again, what type, what space you're going after, freedom to operate in that particular space matters. Because then you are, looking, essentially that's creating a moat for you to get to market and start driving revenue before other players starts jumping in and innovating.
But a lot of that relies on a know-how and the algorithms, and that's hard to differentiate for commoditization concerns. But let me elaborate what I was talking about, why it's not valuable. If you did, let's take a drug technology. Every single net present value, discounted cash flow, probability adjusted for an early stage technology, particularly if you just have IP and you don't even have a development candidate, that's going to be a negative net present value. There's no way around it. You're going to have a negative enterprise value company out of the gate. So the IP is not worth anything, is what I'm saying. But no one's going to invest in you if your IP is not defensible. So what does that mean?
Yes.
The other piece of this is, we know the CRISPR wars, for example, right? At the end of the day, most IP, let me close this window. Most IP does not get litigated until there's a real success at hand. And usually that's in a settlement. There are strategies where they don't even want to touch challenging IP until the drug's commercially approved and generating revenue, because the rewards are going to be greater, the royalty that you get. So most of these, by the time a drug gets through the development and is a success where you might invite litigation and challenges to your IP, that's usually a manageable, solvable issue, right? And that's if you have a weak IP estate, right? So that's why we don't place all of the weight early on IP, because historically, that's never really been an issue to stop from seeing value created, even if you have. Now, I will say this, if you're dealing with a tech transfer group and we see this and they just do the minimum required to, do claim structures and generate, like, you want to intervene early. If they're about to submit a provisional patent, you want somebody who's credible to review that, to strengthen the claim structures, to generate that data, to have more enabling claims around those structures. So I'm agreeing with Lana that, like, don't ignore it. We don't ignore it. But I think at the end of the day, you want that to be as strong as possible, right? To be able to take it off the table as a concern or a reason not to invest.
That asks attorneys. Life science is a complicated field, and who can get your software to market, with 500K and an MVP is a lot different than walking the long and capital intensive path. As VCs, do you care? I know you care, but does it matter that you have a Cooley or a Wilson Sonsini or, one of the big players that especially is focused on life sciences, it's a higher, rate per hour. And sometimes entrepreneurs flinch at that $1,200, $1,400 an hour, price tag. Oh, I can do it for less. But these are attorneys who, have a track record of success and relationships with all of you.
Yeah. I'm going to give you two answers to that. So for most companies that are out there, you don't have to have a Cooley and a Wilson to just get a good IP estate that we're going to evaluate for your specific technology. So like I do a lot in regional hubs and like things that's not, and they're expensive. The other piece of it though, is that they will assess if this is a third rock company with a technology out of MIT, like a Wilson or a Cooley will say, oh yeah, we know this is going to get funded. We'll do all this gratis and we can get paid when you close that big Series A, right? I'm giving you two extremes there, right? And there's a lot of firms that will do some gratis work who believe you have to convince them that I'm going to be able to pay you. I just don't have the money now. And so I would leverage that as much as you can, but I'd say build relationships there and just talk to a lot of firms, talk to other peers who, how did you go about this? What did they charge you, right? Like try to figure out, are there firms that they're competitive, they want business and they don't want Cooley and Wilson to have all of the business. So they're willing to do work to try to get the business, but they have to be convinced that you have a chance to actually get money and that they're going to get paid. And they're usually going to want a quid pro quo, which is like, if we do this for you, we want the business for the subsequent rounds or, for the next time. So that's usually the trade-off. Lana, I don't know how you guys navigate IP firms.
Yeah, well said. Got it.
Carrie.
Just of time, I think we're gonna stop here, but I thank everyone for joining us today, both here in person and online. And a huge thank you to Lana and Chris for this really engaging conversation. I think this has been extremely informative for me. I think that I really appreciate all of the thoughtful questions from the audience, and I hope that everyone got some value out of this as well. So I will let Lana and the others joining virtually go, but we really appreciate you, Lana, and your time today. So join us in a couple of weeks, October 7th, for the next session. We'll be in Johnson City, but again, virtual for those that aren't local to that area. And we will see you soon. Thank you, Lana.
Thanks.
Thanks, Lana.